Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone.
You know what nobody talks about? The actual moment when you realize you need to leave. Not the big dramatic realization that comes later, when you're safely on the other side, telling the story at brunch with your friends. No, I'm talking about that moment when you're still in it, when your stomach is churning, your hands are shaking, and every cell in your body is screaming at you to go. But you stay. You stay because leaving feels like failure. You stay because you've already invested so much. You stay because what will people think? You stay because maybe, just maybe, if you try harder, if you shrink yourself smaller, if you give just a little bit more, it'll get better. I want to talk to you today about something that has taken me decades to understand. Something that our culture doesn't teach us. Something that flies in the face of everything we've been told about perseverance, commitment, and seeing things through. I want to talk to you about the radical, revolutionary act of leaving early. And I don't just mean leaving a job or a relationship, though yes, that too. I mean leaving the conversation that's diminishing you. Leaving the dinner table where you're being disrespected. Leaving the friendship that's become one-sided. Leaving the version of yourself that you've been performing for other people's comfort. Because here's what I've learned, and here's what the research shows us again and again. Staying in something that's harming you doesn't make you loyal. It makes you unavailable to yourself. And that unavailability, it's killing us. Slowly, quietly, one compromise at a time. Let me tell you about a woman I'll call Sarah. Sarah was in a job that was slowly eroding her sense of self. Not in obvious ways. There was no villain here, no cartoonish bad boss. It was subtler than that. It was the way her ideas were consistently credited to someone else. The way she was interrupted in meetings. The way she was asked to be a team player every time she advocated for herself while watching others advance for doing far less. Every Sunday night, Sarah would get this feeling in her chest, like a weight pressing down. She'd start thinking about Monday morning and her breathing would get shallow. She'd mentally prepare herself, put on her armor, rehearse her responses, steel herself for another week of being invisible. And Sarah. She stayed for 3 years longer than she should have. When I asked her why, do you know what she said? Because I didn't want to be someone who quits. Listen to that language. Someone who quits. We have demonized the act of leaving to such an extent that we'd rather betray ourselves than be seen as a quitter. We've created this mythology around endurance. This idea that suffering through something makes us noble, makes us strong, makes us worthy. But here's what I know to be true, and this is backed by decades of research on shame and worthiness. The people who have the strongest sense of self-worth are not the people who endured the most. They're the people who knew when to walk away. They're the people who understood that their presence, their energy, their time, their spirit, is not something to be negotiated down. It's something to be honored. Think about the stories we grow up with. Winners never quit and quitters never win. When the going gets tough, the tough get going. Don't give up. Don't ever give up. These mantras get drilled into us from the time we're children. They're on motivational posters in our schools. They're in every graduation speech. They're woven into the fabric of what we call success. And listen, I'm not saying perseverance isn't important. It absolutely is. But somewhere along the way, we stopped distinguishing between perseverance and self-abandonment. We stopped asking the critical question, what am I actually persevering for? Because if you're persevering to prove something to people who don't see your value, you're not building character. You're building resentment. If you're persevering in a relationship where you're constantly trying to convince someone to treat you with basic respect, you're not demonstrating commitment. You're demonstrating that you don't believe you deserve better. If you're persevering in an environment that requires you to betray your values just to survive, you're not showing strength. You're showing fear. There's a client I worked with once who said something that haunts me to this day. She said, I stayed so long trying to prove I was worthy of respect that I forgot to respect myself. Let that land for a moment. She stayed trying to prove she was worthy of respect, that she forgot to respect herself. When did we decide that leaving something that doesn't serve us is weak? When did we agree that boundaries are the same as barriers? When did we start believing that love means staying no matter what, even when what is destroying us? I think it starts early. I think it starts when we're taught to finish everything on our plate, even when we're full. When we're told to hug relatives we don't want to hug. When we're encouraged to stick it out in friendships that have become toxic because you've been friends for so long. When we're praised for sacrificing our own needs to make other people comfortable. We learn that our discomfort is the price we pay for being good. And then we grow up, and we carry that lesson into every room we enter, every relationship we build, every job we take. We learn to override our internal guidance system. We learn to dismiss that voice inside that's saying, "This doesn't feel right." We learn to call our exhaustion dedication and our depletion commitment. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is disappoint people. Sometimes the bravest act is closing the door quietly and walking away while everyone else is still arguing about whether you should. Because the people who need you to stay small, they're going to argue. They're going to tell you you're being too sensitive, too demanding, too much. They're going to tell you that you're overreacting, that you're not trying hard enough, that you're giving up too easily. And you know what? Let them argue. Let them be disappointed. Let them tell their version of the story where you're the villain who abandoned ship. Your job is not to manage their narrative. Your job is to honor what you know to be true. There's this concept in economics called the sunk cost fallacy. It's the idea that we continue investing in something, time, money, energy, simply because we've already invested so much, even when all evidence shows it's not working. We stay at the poker table because we've already lost so much money. We might as well try to win it back. We keep watching a terrible movie because we're already an hour in. We finish the degree we've realized we don't want because we've already taken 2 years of classes. We hold on to relationships, jobs, friendships, versions of ourselves because, well, we've already put in the work. We've already paid the price. Walking away would mean admitting it was all for nothing. But here's what they don't teach you in economics class. You can't get back the time you've already spent. But you absolutely can stop spending the time you have left. That investment you made, it's gone. It's done. It's in the past. The only question that matters now is, what are you going to do with today? With tomorrow? With the rest of your one precious life? I had a friend, let me call her Maya, who stayed in a relationship for 7 years waiting for her partner to become emotionally available. 7 years. She kept thinking, it'll get better. He's been through trauma. He's working on himself. If I just love him enough, if I just wait long enough, if I just prove I'm worth opening up to. 7 years of having surface-level conversations. 7 years of feeling alone in the same room. 7 years of watching him open up to everyone else. His friends, his coworkers, even strangers at parties. But never to her. Do you know what she said to me when she finally left? She said, "I kept thinking, if I leave now, those 7 years will have been wasted." So I stayed another month, and then another, and another. And you know what? Now it's been 7 years and 6 months, and then 7 years and 9 months, and then 8 years. Light, knowing laugh. She said, the waste wasn't the 7 years I'd already spent. The waste was every day after I knew it wasn't going to change that I stayed anyway. At some point, we have to ask ourselves, am I staying because there's hope? Or am I staying because I'm terrified of what it means about me if I go? Because if you're staying to prove you're not a failure, if you're staying to show everyone you can handle it, if you're staying because leaving would mean admitting you made a mistake, if you're staying because you don't want to be seen as someone who gives up, you're not staying for the right reasons. You're staying for your ego, and your ego will drain your soul dry before it ever admits it was wrong. The sunk cost fallacy isn't just about money or time. It's about identity. It's about the stories we've told ourselves and others about who we are. It's about the Facebook posts we made announcing this new relationship. It's about the excitement we expressed when we got the job. It's about the way we introduced this person as our best friend. It's about the dreams we shared with our parents. And walking away from those stories, that feels like erasing ourselves. But what if, and stay with me here, what if leaving is actually the most honest thing you can do? What if leaving is the moment you finally tell the truth? What if the most authentic version of you isn't the one who stayed despite the cost, but the one who left because the cost was too high? Now, I can already hear some of you pushing back. And I get it, I really do. Because we need to make a distinction here. There's a difference between running away from hard things and walking away from harmful things. There's a difference between quitting because something requires growth and leaving because something requires you to diminish. Growth is uncomfortable. Growth stretches you. Growth asks you to show up when you'd rather hide. Growth requires you to be vulnerable, to risk failure, to try things you're not sure you can do. But here's the key. Growth doesn't ask you to abandon your worth in the process. Harm does. Growth says, this is going to challenge you, but you're going to come out stronger. Harm says, this is going to break you, and you better learn to accept it. Growth invites you to expand. Harm demands you contract. Growth respects your boundaries. Harm violates them repeatedly, and then tells you you're too sensitive for having them. Let me give you a framework for this, because I think this is where people get confused. I think this is where we start believing that any discomfort means we should leave, or that all discomfort means we should stay and toughen up. Ask yourself these questions. First, is this situation asking me to grow, or is it asking me to shrink? Growth says, this is challenging, but I'm learning, I'm expanding. I'm developing skills I didn't have before. I'm becoming more of who I'm meant to be. Shrinking says, I'm disappearing. I'm quieter than I used to be. I'm smaller. I'm apologizing for my existence. I'm constantly second-guessing myself. I don't recognize who I'm becoming. When you're growing, you feel stretched but not broken. You feel challenged but not violated. You feel uncomfortable but not unsafe. When you're shrinking, you feel like you're losing yourself, like you're becoming a ghost of who you used to be, like you're performing a version of yourself that doesn't even feel real anymore. Second, am I changing in ways that align with my values, or am I changing to accommodate someone else's dysfunction? There's a huge difference between developing patience as a value, learning to slow down, to listen more deeply, to not always need to be right, and developing tolerance for disrespect as a survival mechanism. There's a difference between learning healthy conflict resolution and learning how to walk on eggshells so you don't trigger someone's rage. There's a difference between becoming more flexible in your thinking and abandoning your principles entirely because speaking up causes too many problems. If you look at who you're becoming and you like that person, if the changes feel like evolution, like you're shedding old patterns that weren't serving you and stepping into a more mature, integrated version of yourself, that's growth. But if you look at who you're becoming and you barely recognize yourself, if you've become someone who tolerates things you never thought you would, if you've developed coping mechanisms that feel like survival tactics, that's not growth. That's adaptation to toxicity. Third, when I think about staying, do I feel hopeful or do I feel resigned? Hope energizes. Even when it's hard, even when you're tired, hope gives you fuel. Hope says, it's difficult right now, but I can see where this is going. I can see why it matters. I believe something good is on the other side of this challenge. Resignation depletes. Resignation says, this is just how it is. This is just what I have to accept. I'm not even sure why I'm here anymore, but leaving feels impossible, so I guess I'll just stay. Hope looks forward. Resignation looks down. Hope says, it's hard, but it matters. Resignation says, it's hard, and I'm just trying to survive it. Here's a story that illustrates this beautifully. I know a man, I'll call him David, who was training for his first marathon. He'd never been a runner. In fact, he'd spent most of his adult life avoiding exercise. But at 45, after his doctor told him his health markers were concerning, he decided to do something dramatic. He signed up for a marathon. 6 months of training. Early morning runs when it was still dark out. Blisters. Muscle soreness. Complete exhaustion. Learning about pacing and hydration and what to eat before a long run. His family thought he was crazy, but he was committed. 3 weeks before the race, he developed a stress fracture in his shin. His doctor said, you need to stop. If you run this marathon, you could do permanent damage. You could end up unable to run at all. And David had a choice. He could push through, prove he wasn't a quitter, prove he could endure, show everyone he was committed, honor those 6 months of work. Or he could listen to his body and stop. He told me later that the hardest part wasn't the physical pain. It was facing what he thought it meant about him. He said, "I thought if I didn't do the marathon, all that training was for nothing. I thought people would see me as someone who couldn't finish what he started." But then his 15-year-old daughter said something that changed his perspective. She said, "Dad, you spent 6 months getting healthier. That's not nothing. That's huge. Why would you risk your health now just to prove something to people who don't even care?" He stopped. And you know what? Not a single person who mattered thought less of him. Not one. His friends threw him a party anyway. They celebrated the 6 months of discipline, the early mornings, the commitment to his health. They celebrated his transformation, not just physically, but mentally. The fact that he'd overcome his resistance to exercise at all. They celebrated him for knowing the difference between perseverance and self-destruction. And here's the beautiful part: 6 months later, after his shin healed, he ran the marathon, and he finished it. But he did it on his own timeline, when his body was ready, not to meet some arbitrary deadline that would have cost him his ability to run at all. Pause. That's what I want for you. I want you to know that walking away from something that's harming you isn't giving up. It's growing up. It's the moment you decide that your well-being is not negotiable. It's the moment you choose yourself. And yes, that's uncomfortable. Yes, that disappoints people. Yes, that requires you to sit with other people's opinions about who they think you should be. But the alternative is spending your one precious life trying to earn acceptance by abandoning yourself. And I'm telling you right now, that price is too high. Long pause. So what does this look like in practice? Because I think that's where people get stuck. The theory sounds great, but the actual mechanics of leaving, that's where the terror lies. Leaving early looks like saying, "You know what? I'm going to head out when everyone else is still at the party and you're done." It's that simple and that hard. It looks like being at a family gathering where everyone is having the same circular argument they've been having for 20 years. The one where nobody listens. Everyone talks over each other, and someone always ends up in tears and saying, "I'm going to step outside for a bit," and then actually leaving if it doesn't stop. It looks like ending the business meeting when you realize they're not negotiating in good faith, even though you flew across the country to be there, even though you prepared for weeks, even though walking out feels unprofessional. Because you know what's actually unprofessional? Wasting your time with people who never intended to respect you. It looks like telling your family, "I love you, but I'm not participating in this conversation anymore." And then actually not participating, even when they keep going, even when they're upset, even when they tell you you're being too sensitive, even when they say you're ruining the holiday. It looks like breaking up with someone even though they're not bad enough to justify it to your friends. Even though there's no big dramatic reason, no infidelity or abuse that you can point to. Even though you can't explain it in a way that will make everyone understand. Just because you wake up every day feeling lonely despite being in a relationship, and you've realized that being alone might actually feel less lonely than this. It looks like leaving the career you spent a decade building because you wake up every morning with a stone in your chest. Because the money is good, but your soul is dying. Because you've realized that you're becoming someone you don't recognize, and no amount of prestige is worth that cost. It looks like unfollowing people on social media whose content makes you feel bad about yourself, even if they're friends. Even if it might hurt their feelings. Even if they notice. It looks like saying no to commitments you don't want to make, even when you don't have a good enough excuse. Even when "I don't want to" feels insufficient to everyone else. Here's what leaving early doesn't look like. It doesn't look like having all the answers. It doesn't look like a perfect plan. It doesn't look like everyone understanding. It doesn't look like avoiding pain. Because, and this is crucial, leaving will hurt. Staying will hurt. You have to choose your pain. But here's the difference. The pain of leaving is acute. It's sharp, it's intense. It feels like it's going to kill you in the moment. But it moves through you. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's the pain of grief, of loss, of uncertainty. But it's also the pain of truth, of alignment, of choosing yourself. The pain of staying is chronic. It's a low-grade fever that never quite breaks. It becomes so familiar you forget you're sick. It's the pain of slow erosion, of watching yourself disappear, of lying to yourself every day about why you're still there. It's death by 1,000 compromises. And here's what I've learned: the human spirit can endure acute pain. We're built for it. We can walk through fire and come out the other side. But chronic pain, that breaks us. That turns us into people we don't recognize. I want to tell you about the night I left a friendship that had become toxic. This was someone I'd known for 15 years. 15 years. We'd been through everything together: breakups, job losses, weddings, births. We had history. We had inside jokes. We had shared trauma and shared joy. But somewhere along the way, the relationship had become completely one-sided. Every conversation became about her problems, her drama, her needs. And I became the designated support system, the therapist, the sounding board, the one who was always available, always understanding, always there. And every time I tried to talk about what was going on in my life, she'd listen for about 30 seconds before saying something like, "Oh my God, that reminds me of what happened to me," and we'd be right back to talking about her. I remember sitting in my car after we'd had coffee one afternoon. We'd been there for 2 hours, and I'd talked for maybe 10 minutes total. The rest had been her processing the same situation she'd been processing for months. A situation I'd already given her feedback on multiple times. A situation she wasn't actually interested in changing. She just wanted to keep talking about it. And I sat there in my car and I was just exhausted, completely drained. Like someone had pulled a plug and all my energy had just leaked out onto the floor of that coffee shop. And I thought, this is not how love should feel. Friendship should energize you. Even when you're supporting someone through hard things, even when it's heavy, there should be reciprocity. There should be mutuality. There should be care flowing both ways. But I'd been carrying her for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be carried. So I called her a few days later. My hands were shaking. My mouth was dry. I'd rehearsed what I was going to say probably 50 times. And I said, "I need to talk to you about our friendship. I'm feeling like our relationship has become imbalanced. I feel like I show up for you consistently, but when I need support, it's not really there. And I need to take some space to figure out if this friendship is healthy for me." And do you know what happened? She lost it. She told me I was abandoning her during the hardest time of her life. She told me I was selfish, that I was being a bad friend, that I clearly didn't understand what real friendship was about. She told me that real friends show up no matter what, that real friends don't put conditions on their support. And in that moment, I had two choices. I could stay and prove I wasn't those things, prove I wasn't selfish, prove I wasn't a bad friend, prove I understood what real friendship meant. Or I could leave and trust that the right people would understand. I left. And it was one of the hardest things I've ever done. Harder than leaving jobs. Harder than ending romantic relationships. Because there was this narrative in my head that you don't leave friendships. You work through them. You compromise. You accept that people have flaws. But I'd been accepting her flaws while she wasn't even acknowledging mine existed. I'd been compromising while she wasn't budging an inch. I'd been working through it while she wasn't even aware there was anything to work through. The first few weeks were awful. I kept questioning myself. Had I been too harsh? Too demanding? Was I actually being selfish? Should I have tried harder? Given more time? But you know what? 6 months later, I had so much more energy for the friendships that were mutual. I had space for new people who saw me. I had room to breathe. I realized how much of my emotional bandwidth had been consumed by that one relationship. And I also realized that I'd been modeling to everyone in my life that I was available to be taken advantage of. That my needs didn't matter. That I would always be there no matter how one-sided things became. When I left that friendship, I didn't just end a relationship. I drew a line. I said, this is where I stop. This is where my boundaries are. This is what I will no longer tolerate. And that changed everything. That's what leaving early gives you. It gives you space for what's actually meant for you. It gives you energy for relationships that reciprocate. It teaches people how to treat you. It shows you that you're capable of choosing yourself even when it's hard. Here's what I want you to know. When you leave something that's not serving you, when you choose yourself, even when it's terrifying, even when it disappoints people, even when you don't have all the answers, something shifts, not immediately. You don't walk out the door and suddenly feel amazing. In fact, you might feel worse at first. There's grief, there's doubt. There's that voice that says, maybe you made a mistake. Maybe you should go back. Maybe you could have tried harder. Maybe you're being too sensitive. Maybe nobody else would have left. Maybe there's something wrong with you. That voice is loud, and it's convincing, because it's using every insecurity you've ever had against you. But if you can sit with that discomfort, if you can resist the urge to fill the space you've created with the same patterns you just left, if you can tolerate the uncertainty of not knowing what comes next, something remarkable happens. You remember who you are, not who you've been performing for everyone else, not who you think you should be based on what your parents wanted or what society expects or what your Instagram feed suggests, but who you actually are underneath all the armor, underneath all the people pleasing, underneath all the proving. And from that place, from that solid, grounded place of knowing yourself, you start to rebuild. But this time, you're building with different materials. This time, you're not building to prove anything to anyone. This time, you're building on a foundation of self-respect. And let me tell you, things built on self-respect, they last, they weather storms. They don't crumble the first time someone expresses disappointment in you. I want you to imagine something with me. Imagine you're at a table. Maybe it's a relationship, a job, a friendship, a family dynamic, and everyone at this table has been assigned a role. You know yours. You've been playing it for so long you can do it in your sleep. Maybe you're the peacemaker, the one who smooths everything over, who makes sure everyone else is comfortable, who sacrifices your own needs to keep things pleasant. Maybe you're the responsible one, the one everyone calls when they need something, the one who's always reliable, the one who never says no. Maybe you're the fixer, the one who's supposed to have all the answers, solve all the problems, carry everyone else's emotional weight. And one day you stand up from that table. You push back your chair, the legs scrape against the floor. Everyone stops talking and looks at you. And you say, I'm done, not angry, not dramatic, just done. And you walk away. At first, everyone panics. They try to get you to come back. Where are you going? We're not finished. You can't just leave. What about us? What are we supposed to do? You're being so dramatic. You're overreacting. Come back and sit down. They tell you you're abandoning them. They tell you you're being selfish. They tell you you're not trying hard enough. They might even try to make you feel guilty, remind you of all the good times, all the history, all the reasons you should stay. But here's what's really happening. The table is reorganizing itself. The system is adjusting, and it will adjust whether you're there or not. Maybe they'll find someone else to play your role. Maybe they'll finally learn to function without someone playing that role at all. Maybe the whole table will collapse. Maybe it'll transform into something healthier. But that's not your responsibility anymore. Long pause. The question is, do you want to be part of a system that requires your diminishment to function? Or do you want to find or create a table where your full presence is not just welcomed, but required? Because here's the truth that nobody tells you. When you leave something that's not serving you, you're not just saving yourself. You're also teaching everyone at that table what's acceptable. You're modeling boundaries. You're showing them that people who love themselves don't stay where they're being harmed. And maybe they learn. Maybe they look at the empty chair where you used to sit and think, wow, we really took them for granted. Maybe they change how they treat the next person. Maybe your leaving creates a crack in their awareness that eventually becomes genuine transformation. Or maybe they don't learn. Maybe they replace you with someone else who's willing to play that role. Maybe they tell stories about how you couldn't handle it, how you were too sensitive, how you let everyone down. But that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to honor the one life you've been given. There's something I need to say here, because I think it's easy to hear this message and think I'm encouraging people to leave at the first sign of discomfort, to run from anything that requires effort or patience or growth. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not telling you to quit your job the first time you have a hard day. I'm not telling you to end your relationship the first time you have a fight. I'm not telling you to abandon your commitments when they get challenging. What I'm telling you is that there's a difference between temporary discomfort and chronic harm. Between something that's hard because it's helping you grow and something that's hard because it's slowly destroying you. I'm telling you to pay attention to the difference. I'm telling you to notice when you've stopped growing and started shrinking. When you've stopped evolving and started surviving. When you've stopped living and started enduring. I'm telling you that your gut knows. Your body knows. That tightness in your chest knows. That knot in your stomach knows. That exhaustion that no amount of sleep can cure knows. And I'm telling you that it's okay to trust that knowing. Even when you can't fully articulate it. Even when you can't justify it to everyone else. Even when it disappoints people. Your knowing is valid. Your experience is real. Your needs matter. So here's what I want to leave you with today. If you're in something right now that's diminishing you, if you're at a table where your voice doesn't matter, if you're in a relationship where you're constantly trying to earn what should be freely given, if you're in a job that's slowly eroding your sense of worth, if you're holding on to a version of yourself that you've outgrown because everyone else prefers that version, you have permission to leave. Not permission from me, really, because you don't need my permission, but maybe permission from that part of yourself that's been waiting to hear someone say it's okay. It's okay. You don't need a better reason. You don't need more evidence. You don't need everyone to understand. You don't need to wait until it gets bad enough to justify leaving. You don't need to prove that you tried hard enough. You need to honor what you know to be true in your bones. And yes, it's going to be hard. Yes, people will have opinions. Yes, you'll doubt yourself at 2 a.m. Yes, there will be moments when you wonder if you made the right choice. Yes, you'll grieve. Yes, you'll be scared. But on the other side of that fear, on the other side of that discomfort, on the other side of that grief, there's you, the real you, the you who doesn't have to shrink to fit, the you who doesn't have to perform to be loved, the you who knows that your presence is not something to be negotiated, it's something to be celebrated, the you who understands that your self-worth is not determined by how much you can endure, but by how well you honor what you need. Walking away doesn't make you weak. It makes you wise. It makes you someone who understands that your life is finite, that your energy is precious, that your time is the only currency that actually matters. Leaving early doesn't make you a quitter. It makes you someone who understands that your life is not a sunk cost, that the past doesn't dictate the future, that you get to change your mind, that you get to evolve, that you get to say, I thought this would work, but it doesn't, and I'm choosing differently now. Choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish. It makes you available for the relationships, the work, the life that's actually meant for you. Because when you're drained by things that don't serve you, you have nothing left for the things that do. So if you need to hear this today, go, leave, walk away, close the door. Say no, choose yourself, not because it's easy, but because you're worth it, not because you have it all figured out, but because staying will cost you more than leaving ever could. Not because you're running from something, but because you're finally running toward yourself. Not because the people you're disappointing don't matter, but because you matter too. And somewhere along the way, you forgot that. And when you get there, when you find yourself on the other side, standing in the space you've created by honoring your worth, you're going to realize something beautiful. You didn't lose anything by leaving. You found everything by going. You didn't abandon anyone. You returned to yourself. You didn't fail. You finally succeeded at the thing that matters most, living a life that's true to who you actually are. The power was never in staying where you didn't belong. The power was never in enduring what was harming you. The power was never in proving yourself to people who didn't see your worth. The power was always in knowing when to walk away. And you, my friend, have that power right now. In this moment, you've always had it. The question is, are you ready to use it? Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. And thank you for having the courage to consider that maybe, just maybe, the thing you've been calling loyalty is actually abandonment of yourself. You deserve better. You deserve relationships that reciprocate. You deserve work that honors your worth. You deserve a life that feels like yours, And it starts the moment you stand up from that table and choose you. Go, be brave. Remember, your self-worth is not up for negotiation. Not anymore. Never again.